Hey everyone, it's Anthony here at Talk and Review, and the long wait is finally over. Yes, I'm talking about Game of Thrones Season 8. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be reviewing the first episode of Season 8 that has been titled Winterfell. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the two areas that this episode covers from south to north. So the first area we're looking at is King's Landing, the second being Winterfell. So down in King's Landing, you've got Cersei Lannister, who is pretty lonely down there. Jaime, at the end of the last season, left her to fight the battle for the living, and she is down there awaiting the arrival of the Golden Company, led by Euron Greyjoy, and they're arriving on the shores of King's Landing. Euron uses this moment to gain some leverage over Cersei, and it's quite interesting, the dynamic between the two, because it very much feels like this is the first moment where Cersei, as the Queen, doesn't hold all the cards or doesn't have all the power. And what that results in is her giving herself up to Euron to be able to keep him on side. And what I mean by that is sexually. What he wants is the Queen. He wants her. He wants to be able to give her a prince. He wants to be able to rule the kingdoms with her. And as I said, this is the first time where she's had to basically give him what he wants because he uses his leverage against her. And it's probably the first time we see Cersei really vulnerable. She's very much alone right now. And I feel like that makes her, one, extremely vulnerable, but two, it makes her extremely dangerous. So I am very interested to see what comes next with Cersei. She didn't get those elephants though, pesky elephants. So moving up north to Winterfell, we have the arrival of Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen. They are accompanied by the Unsullied, the Dothraki, her advisors, and the dragons. So they're met at Winterfell with some mixed feelings around their return. Obviously, a lot of people put a lot of trust in Jon and proclaimed him King of the North. For him to have obviously bent the knee to Daenerys in the previous season, people of the North haven't taken too kind to that, and they're not shy about letting him know, especially in the form of Lyanna Mormont, who is not one for mixing her words, tells Jon exactly how it is and exactly how people of the North are feeling. So there's a bit of animosity in the air towards both Jon and Daenerys. So the animosity is mainly amongst the people. In terms of the family, in terms of the Starks, everyone is very happy to see Jon back, and we get to see Jon reunited with Arya for the first time since season 1. And much like Sansa, it's a very lovely scene to see them together again. So this episode isn't an action-packed episode, it's very much a scene-setting kind of episode, basically making the way for the episodes to come. It's not to say it's a bad episode, I actually really enjoyed this episode, and it's really nice to see things starting to finally form to build up to essentially the last hurrah for mankind. And what it does, it provides some very interesting conversations and interactions between people that we have known individually but never known together, such as Daenerys and Samwell. And what that does to us as viewers is it really toys with us, because we have certain things that we like about these individual characters, but when these characters come together in terms of even just in a conversation, it's never something you really piece together as a puzzle in your head until it's right there in front of you, and it provides for some entertaining moments, especially, as I said before, with Daenerys and Samwell. I think this is one of the better scenes in the episode, where Daenerys had to tell Sam that she is ultimately responsible for the death of his father and his brother. Now, in isolation, we saw that episode and we kind of either agreed with it or we didn't agree with it, but we know the reason for it. Now that we see how Sam reacts to that, but not only just reacts to that, is reacting to the person that's responsible for that. It's a very rare thing to be able to get in Game of Thrones, especially when those two people are ultimately on the same side. And it provides for a very interesting dynamic between the group, because whilst everyone's got their skepticism about Daenerys, these kind of things don't do her any favours, especially knowing how things went with her father. She's not seen in the best light by a lot of people, and these kind of things don't help, but she is there to aid in the battle for good, and these kind of things are needed to be seen past by these people. But ultimately it is very, very personal, especially to Sam, about what's happening, and it's very, very difficult to see past that, as Jon is asking everyone to do. So there were a couple of good moments in this episode whilst building the storyline going forward. There are a couple of some odd moments, but mainly on the whole it was a really positive episode and really enjoyable episode. So the moments that I'm speaking of are Sam and Jon in the crypt. This was a really, really interesting moment actually, because this is the moment where Sam had to tell Jon that he is a Targaryen and he is the heir to the throne, but he's doing it in such a way that because he's just found out about his father and his brother, that he's using it as almost a weapon against Daenerys rather than giving Jon the information as it is. He's using it as a way to get back at Daenerys, almost to say, you are the king, you are the rightful king, and she should step down. Whereas I think if he hadn't known that information before, he would have told it him in the truest form, as Sam probably should have, devoiding all feeling against it. But obviously now that he knows what he knows, he's always going to have that opinion. So it's a very odd way of approaching it. But I think because of what's happened, he's approached it in probably the best way that he can to get the point across. And I think it was a perfect way to get that across to Jon in a way that is very uncharacteristic of the person that delivered it, which is really, really nice to see. The other moment that was quite a big spectacle, it's probably the biggest spectacle of the episode, is the dragon riding moment. So Jon and Daenerys both mount the remaining dragons and fly over the north, over Winterfell, over the snow, and in a very cinematic kind of spectacle. You can tell that the creators have poured in quite a lot of money and invested quite a lot into the CGI, because the CGI was really, really good. It's questionable whether you needed this element in the episode at all. I don't think that you necessarily needed it, but it did pose a question for me straight away that I'm not too sure why Daenerys didn't pick up on it. I'm sure that the only people that are able to ride dragons are Targaryens. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the only people that are supposed to ride dragons are Targaryens, or able to ride dragons. I'm sure it's only Targaryens that are able to do that. So I'm not too sure why she didn't twig or raise her eyebrow or question why Jon has a strange ability to be able to interact with these dragons. Not just interact with them, but ride the dragon as she can. And I'm unsure, maybe it's because she's blinded by a little bit of love, because obviously they're digging each other right now. But it seemed very odd that she didn't question that, because the first thing that I thought of is, why is no one questioning why he can ride this dragon and why it's not throwing him off and eating him or burning him alive? Ultimately, no one else knows he's a Targaryen other than the viewers and Sam and Bran, so why is no one questioning that? But overall, very cinematic look and very, very nice to see from a CGI perspective. But again, it's questionable whether or not it was necessary. And the last moment I want to speak about is the very last scene with Tormund and Beric. They survived the collapse of the wall, which we didn't get to see how or what they went through to survive it, but we know they survived. So it looks like they're back down on their way to Winterfell and trying to get back to Jon Snow to warn them about the threat that they have just seen with the Night King bringing the wall down. So they stop off at an abandoned castle, and they can see that this castle has been absolutely decimated. There's blood everywhere, there's snow everywhere. It's a very eerie presence. And they ultimately come across something that I'm sure that they didn't expect to see or want to see, but they saw it, and we all saw it. So what they came across is a child nailed to a wall with body limbs making almost kind of like a snow spiral. Now, if anyone's wondering where that looks familiar from, if you cast your minds all the way back to the first episode, you can remember the very opening scene when the Night's Watch members were beyond the wall. Once all the bodies were found and killed, they were depicted in this same style. So it's very much a calling card of the White Walkers. But not only was this scene quite horrific simply because, one, there's a child up there, and two, there's body parts everywhere. This child reanimates, and in quite a horrific fashion, and it's almost a jump scare moment, and they have to light it on fire to be able to kill it. And it was a wonderful way of building tension towards the end of the episode, and a wonderful reminder that the threat is still real whilst we're still building the picture of all the characters we know. And it was a great way to kind of cap off that moment. And then finally, the very final moments of the episode, we get to see Jaime arriving in Winterfell, and he locks eyes with Bran. Now, I know that this is an interaction that most people have been looking forward to, simply because we don't know whether or not Bran is going to be accepting of the fact that Jaime pushed him out, because if he hadn't have pushed him out the window right back in season 1, would he have become the person that he has become? Or is he going to be annoyed? Ultimately he tried to kill him. But at the same time, you've got that, you've also got Daenerys. He killed her father. What is she going to do to him? I mean, she burnt alive 2 people that wouldn't bend the knee. What's she going to do to the guy that murdered her father? I think Jaime is going to prevail through it. I think he's too much of an important character to fall here. So overall then, I am thoroughly happy with this episode. I think it's a great start to the season. Yes, it was a bit of a slow burner, and yes, it was a lot shorter than what everyone was expecting. This one was only I think it was an hour and 5 minutes long or in total. Next episode is of similar length, and then the last 4 episodes are going to be much longer. So I imagine the next episode is probably going to be another continuation of the setting the scene, building into the action, and the last 4 are going to be all-out action, which I am absolutely buzzing for. I cannot wait. We're going to be reviewing each episode as it comes out each week, so stay tuned for that. But season 8 is here, it's finally arrived, and I for one cannot be happier. I want to ask you a question now. I want to know who you think will be the first casualty, who you think will be the first death of the season, and also who you think will prevail, who will be sat on that Iron Throne by the end of the season. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Make sure you click that like button and subscribe to the channel for future content. Like I said, we've got these weekly reviews coming out, but we're also reviewing things in the future and ongoing through these weeks as well. So stay tuned for that. Make sure you check us out on Facebook and Instagram, where we're posting updates on a very regular basis, so check that out as well. We'll see you next week for the next review and episode 2. Peace!